Okay, well, I think we will just kind of start to get going. So excited to have everyone join us today for this event. I've been looking forward to it for a while now. So my name's Laura. I'm an associate director at Fierce, and I've been here for about 5 months now. Time has kind of flown by, definitely. And I'm honored to kind of have both of these amazing guests with me today to talk about articulating design decisions. Before I hand it over to them, I'm just going to kick off with a few housekeeping bits. So some of you have already started posting, loving to see where you're all coming from, but please use the chat throughout. We always love hearing your thoughts, your reactions, and all your questions as we go along. So we're going to be here for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll be heading over to the Fearless Community Slack channel to spend some time answering questions there for sort of the last 15 minutes of the hour. So depending on time, we'll try and answer a few questions in here in Zoom, but if we don't get to yours, we're going to try and capture it and we'll have it answered for you in the channel in Slack. So head over there to get all the wisdom and answers from these two. What else? If you are not already in the channel, obviously, I think the wonderful Baxter is on the call and we'll share a link to sign up to the community now. So have a look at the chat, and once you sign up, you'll receive an email shortly. So keep an eye out for that. And the final point for me is just that we are recording. So please be aware of that. And the recording will be sent out for those that signed up for the event, probably within the next few days. I think that's everything I needed to cover. So I will hand it over to our two guests to introduce themselves.
I can go first. Hi, everyone. This is Ioana from Mental Design Academy, and some of you might know me from UX Goodies, maybe. I'm a UX designer. I'm also recently a fresh entrepreneur, launching my own UX bootcamp alongside Radu, who's also a guest on our panel today. Just about me in a nutshell, I've been a UX designer for 7 years now. I've worked with mostly with big companies like ING Bank, UiPath, and also did some startup work. So going down, getting my hands dirty on building products from scratch. In the meantime, I also built UX Goodies, which is an Instagram profile, if you want, with over 200,000 followers. And this opened the door for me to meet many people from the design industry, create a valuable network that I'm happy to expose others to. And also it kind of helped me understand the design industry and the important topics. And I feel that today's topic is one of those questions or areas that we need to explore, both as an industry, but also as an individual. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talk about articulating design decisions. And I'm going to invite my co-founder, Radu, to talk about himself a little.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Radu. I'm based out of Bucharest, Romania. Been a designer for about 17 years. Started off when we barely had an internet connection. So those were interesting times of getting knowledge. I think it's amazing that right now we can join in a meeting and share knowledge with video and audio and all that good stuff. So things have definitely changed. I've worked in startups. I've worked in large companies like Fitbit and Adobe. And I think throughout my career, I discovered my Achilles heel was articulating design decisions. So if I wanted to get my point across, I had to learn how to do that. And it's you probably need to do it in different ways based on like startup world versus corporate. But I'm super happy to talk about this today because I think it's one of those things that all designers can improve about themselves, myself included. Thank you.
Amazing. So I'm going to piggyback on that one, Radu, then. I think you've said it. I think we've all had the experience of coming out of a situation, a meeting, and just feeling a bit disappointed, or just kind of feeling like we sort of lost that battle. We had a great idea, a great concept, whatever it was, and we just didn't get the enthusiasm or the buy-in that we wanted or were expecting. Whether it's been with stakeholders, with other designers within your team, or even kind of your design leads as well. So I'd love to just start by asking you both if you could share a story of a scenario like this that's happened to the two of you. Maybe Radu, you can kick us off.
Oh, sure. So I thought long and hard about this, and I wanted to come up with a very, very specific example. Unfortunately, I could not recall any that has happened recent, but I think I can recall when back in my early career years, I would complete a design and send it to a client. So back then I was doing a lot of like web design, and they would go like, my wife doesn't like it, or like, can you make this larger, the classical, make the logo bigger, make the banner red, or stuff like that. And I could not understand why this was happening to me. And it was obviously a very frustrating process, because I knew the decisions that I made were good, but obviously I wasn't conveying them, right? So because I wasn't, I would get this sort of feedback where I was like, oh my God, now I have to do what they say. And it was painful. It was painful. And really my work, the way I saw it and the way I thought it should be done, ended up being what was published, right? So that was a very difficult time of my career. But luckily that pushed me to learn how to, then sell that, and how to have these people understand, like, hey, here's what went into creating this, and why is it the way it is, and why I think your feedback might not work in this particular case.
Great, very relatable answer from Radu. I can definitely, I've been in that situation myself, where somebody's very subjective feedback kind of ruined the entire presentation I just given, like something along the lines of, I don't know who doesn't like, the CEO doesn't like this particular design, they want a bigger logo. I think coming with specific examples, I believe that in every or most of the presentations I've done in a critique setup, like showcasing my thought process, showcasing the design thinking that went behind a particular design solution, most of the times there was something that was miscommunicated. And I've always felt like I'm a very strong communicator. This is my strong point. I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna crush it. But almost every time there's some point that's like a source of misalignment or misunderstandings. And I think something very particular that kept happening was that I knew the power of wireframes, because wireframes kind of keep the conversation focused around the functionality, the structure, the flows, and typically don't have the same tendency of derailing into make the logo bigger. I don't like that particular image. I don't like that shade of blue and whatever. So I kept thinking that wireframes will convey my thinking process and will communicate what this amazing product is supposed to do. But many times I've ran into the situation where my audience couldn't really understand wireframes, because it was simply a bit too abstract for them, or a bit unclear, or there was a lot of guessing that needed to be made as to how it actually works. So what I've learned is that always when you present your design solution, be there to tell the story that went into it. So articulating design decisions is about talking about them. So not just sending out a deliverable that you feel showcases your process and showcases that particular solution in a spectacular way from your perspective, but not very easy to understand by others. And that's one thing. And another thing that I feel was a personal mistake I kept making was that I didn't really tailor the type of deliverable to the audience that I was presenting to. So this is another lesson that I've learned the hard way, but that I hope we will dive deeper in this conversation in the following points. So yeah, that's my answer in a nutshell.
Yeah, we will definitely be diving into all of that. Don't worry. I mean, I think you've touched on so much around like why it's important as well to articulate those decisions in the first place, whether it's for your own kind of confidence and also whether it's kind of, as you said, Radu, the kind of to get the best kind of end result as well. But I think, and we'll definitely kind of come on to kind of getting your wisdom on a lot of that, but I'd love to understand from the two of you as well, because I've been there. I've had exactly the same conversation where you'd think, okay, cool, I showed a wireframe, they didn't understand the wireframe, so let's kind of move to visuals, and then you'd move to visuals, and then it's sort of like, oh well, now they're getting caught up on all other things. So it's kind of like how you kind of in that's kind of like win lose, we're just not really sure. So I kind of like to, before we kind of go into any kind of solutions, just to understand, what do you think the sort of challenges are for designers in being able to articulate their design decisions well?
Should I go first? So personally, I think there's a lot of challenges with us as designers. So kind of thinking about this, a lot of times we just make the mistake of just sending the designs, right? So that's one challenge. You cannot articulate your design decisions if you've sent the designs. Like we do this a lot of times. We finish a piece of work and we send it, right? And that's, in my view, not the right way to do it. You should be there because what you're showing is the result, but you also need to help people understand how you got there, because otherwise they won't be able to judge it well, right? The design is a solution to something, and you're only showing the solution, and without knowing the problem or what you tried or what were the limitations that you had or challenges, it might seem that you haven't done enough or you've done too much. Other times it's really a lack of understanding on the designer side of their process and why they're doing that. So in my interviewing sessions in my career as a hiring manager, I've had the opportunity to see a lot of designers just mentioning that they've done an activity such as research, personas, but they didn't understand why. Their response was, this is the process, but not why. Like, why is it helpful? How did it help in the process? All of that. So I think one of the challenges is that simply we don't understand our own craft that well to explain it to others. So how can you articulate your design decisions? How can you explain to others when you don't have a good understanding first? And then it comes down to practice. You know, we don't practice this. We don't put ourselves in those situations because it's also like a bit uncomfortable, right? You need to present and you need to, be in the spotlight. And sometimes we don't like that. So we avoid it and we don't get better at it. And that is a challenge. To be honest, I think people are open to hearing things and being open to understand if you're there to kind of convey that.
I'm going to build on top of that. Some of the challenges that I've seen around communicating design decisions and articulating the rationale that goes into a particular design solution, I feel that those challenges are in some areas, if you want. I'm going to list those areas. So on one hand, I think that many times, like I said, there's a misalignment between what you're presenting and who you're presenting to. So there's always the vocabulary gap, if you want, the language gap. If you're showcasing something very design technical, right? Some wireframes where you're talking about, you're using all the UX terms, you're not adjusting the way you present your design solution, and you're presenting to a client or some other stakeholder that comes from a business background that doesn't have doesn't know the UX buzzwords and doesn't make sense of all that jargon, then that's one of the main challenges that I've seen happen again and again. So not adjusting. Also, the same goes for presenting your design solution to developers when there's a different, and also presenting to designers. So each case is different, and you as a designer should be in charge of adjusting and adapting the way you present and even what parts of the design solution you showcase based on your audience. So this is one challenge that I've seen again and again, and the vocabulary issue. Another thing is that sometimes when we present a design solution, there's this sort of a cognitive load that we're inviting everyone to. So it just feels pretty heavy to process by people who are not as immersed in the problem as we are. And so I think what we need to do is to simplify or make sure that we're showing digestible information, the essential parts, the parts that are relevant, because I think that designers tend to many times go into a lot of detail, show everything that went into the process, and then it becomes just hard to process for the person who's listening or receiving that particular presentation. And the last point, still about controlling and leading the conversation, I think this is if I were to choose like one most important point or main challenge that goes in all cases of showcasing design solutions, I think it's the right framing to that conversation. So I think that our responsibility and our job, the essence of our design role, is to be able to lead and control the conversation in a healthy manner, set boundaries, frame the conversation that we're about to have, communicate to our audience what we want to get out of that conversation, what we will be showing, how the conversation will be structured, when they're expected to ask questions, to interfere, and so on. So I think that vocabulary, adjusting to your audience, be careful with the cognitive load, as well as framing the conversation is what I feel are the most common challenges.
I love that. I was actually thinking kind of before this conversation, like this last week, all about it. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and I think you really just touched on there, was I think sometimes as designers, we're focused so much on like who we're designing for. We're designing it for the users, and almost you suddenly get a bit of kind of tunnel vision. I think what I loved about what you just said there is the kind of the same empathy that we're building for our users. We need to be building for the people, whether it's the stakeholders or just the people that we're sort of presenting to. So maybe they don't understand the jargon and all this tech kind of terminology, as you say. Maybe they don't really get wireframes. Like these are the type of things that we need to be thinking about, and almost thinking about it as an experience for them. And like, what is the story, as you say, that we're going to tell? Like ultimately, like, what do they care about, and how do we then tailor that story to them to kind of tick those boxes to go, this is what they care about, this is how we're sort of going to present the way that we are talking to them, and how we kind of shape the conversation, as you discussed. I think one of the other things, and I was talking to someone about this, I'd love to get your view on it. When it comes to articulating decisions, it's a lot easier to do when it's sort of black and white, when you've got something that you can kind of go, this is the right way of doing it. Whereas with design and design decisions, they can sometimes feel a bit, I don't want to say wishy-washy, maybe a bit kind of subjective, and not as black and white. And I kind of would love to get a sense from the two of you, is how do you kind of see that as a challenge for designers as well? Radu, do you want to kick us off? Yeah.
Right. So I think that kind of stems from the fact that there is no one perfect solution for a problem, right? So to be honest, I see that as a challenge in terms of, as Ioana said, setting the context, right? If you don't do that, and if you only show the solution, other three options could have been appropriate, and you're going to be asked like, why this, right? So I think listing the solution you ended up with is the result of your work in terms of like research and working with others and a host of other people that made decisions together with you, like product managers and developers and stakeholders. So I think to kind of address that, I would just list why. That's the essence of articulating your design decisions. You got to tell people how you ended up with that solution and why it's not something else, right? Because it could be subjective. It could be that we could have found a better color for the main call to action on our app, but brand has decided that we need to use that in all of our communication because that's the brand strategy, right? So if you if you don't bring in that context, then other two options would have been really feasible and you need to communicate that. You need to communicate how you ended up. And I think that also kind of opens up to, okay, what other solutions we could have ended up with if we did things a little differently. So I think, one of the challenges is not to fall in love with your solution and to realize there could be other appropriate solutions for the problem that you solved. And if you don't fall in love with it, and if you set the context, then I think it's not a challenge anymore. It's an opportunity to, do things better.
I love that.
So building on Laura's point around how design feels wishy-washy, I feel that design kind of invites everyone in. And there's also this ongoing conversation in the industry around how everyone is a designer, everybody deserves a seat at the design table because we're all contributing to the final solution. I think this also encourages different roles in the organization to jump in and have design opinions, which is great. And I think that designers should always lead with a yes, and they say, yes, that's a good point, but let's see why we made that particular decision, and circle back to the design rationale that they're showcasing. But definitely, if I never go to my developer's desk and say, you know what, I think here you should have done things differently. I think this code will look much better in blue. That doesn't happen. So I think that the trouble with being a designer is that everyone can have opinions around that, and it definitely makes it a bit subjective. But to take some of the subjectivism out of the story, I think what we can do as designers is to do our homework very well throughout the process and show data as much as possible. So whenever there's a debate or somebody has an opinion or they would like something differently, then if we are able to articulate what it means to the users, what we found out from research, what the data that we have says, then we make it less subjective and more about the user, which is kind of our role in the design process, right? So showing the data makes it feel less wishy-washy, and also it builds trust with your audience. And another point that I want to make is that when you show a solution and people might say, oh, but I have other ideas for different solutions, or I think it would have been better to do it another way. If you want to prevent that or kind of anticipate what might be other ideas for solutions, you can prevent that. You can talk about the design trade-offs that you've done in that particular solution, the different other solutions that you explored, maybe not all of them, but the main ones, and show why you chose a particular solution and how that relates to the research and to other information that you have available and is reliable. So yeah, maybe show different solutions to be able to anticipate comments that might come from your audience.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And just talking about kind of making decisions, making it on data, I'd say just track the decisions that you make as you go along, because someone can say, hey, like, why have you done that? And if you made that decision like 3 months ago, a lot of the time you're kind of like, I know I had a reason for it, but I just can't remember it. And if you can just say, give me a minute, I'll pull it up and I can tell you exactly why that decision was made, then you, as you say, like you build a lot more trust and a bit more kind of credibility, be like, oh, they've thought about this, they're doing it. I think talking with data, as you say, it's so powerful because it just removes subjectivity. And a lot of the time there might not be research for whatever reason you haven't been able to do it. You can't say, oh, this is kind of what the user wants, which is sort of like the ideal state. But I think there are so many other things that you can fall back on, even little things like colors. Well, you go, wow, like accessibility and all of this stuff, just to kind of give that air of kind of credence. Sorry, Radu, I can see you've got your hand up. So
I also have something to say, but I'll rather go first.
Yeah, I also, as you were
okay, so can you like
I think I muted everyone because we had some feedback there. As you were talking, something came to mind, which is another powerful thing in kind of moving away from this wishy-washy of design is also showing what else have you done, what else have you explored, what else didn't make it to the presentation. Because a lot of times people might think, oh, there's 3 other options of this, but showing those, like, and I always have like I call it the graveyard. So I have either a page in my Figma or like at the bottom of the page where I just like everything that didn't make the cut, I just drag it there. I don't delete it. And then I refer back to the graveyard every time I need to present like what else didn't make it to the presentation.
Yeah, I love the point about showing different solutions. Definitely, that's super important as much as time allows. So not going into that's the only point, that if you show too many things, then the conversation will also derail again, but in different ways. And I wanted to add to Laura's point. I was keeping my best the piece of advice for today for the peak of this conversation, but I think we're there, and you kind of teased it, Laura. So the number one piece of advice that I would give to someone who wants to improve their capacity of articulating design decisions is to document everything. Document your process, document conversations, document milestones, document deliverables. As long as you have everything written down and you don't rely solely on your memory, which is can play a lot of pranks on us, document everything, and that will also force you to kind of articulate at every step of the process why you made a particular decision, what went into a particular solution. And so if you do your homework early on, there won't be a way in which you won't be able to defend your decisions once it comes down to that. So document everything. Also, self-reflection is very important. So sitting down at different points in the design process and looking into yourself. Why did I do that? How did I react in that particular moment? What made me steer onto that particular solution, and so on, will definitely help you a lot when it comes to being articulate in presentations and in conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I feel like if we've got there, we've got to the peak, so I'm not going to put it off kind of any longer. I think best tips, let's talk about kind of what we can do to kind of give people something that they can take away to make the kind of concept of articulating design decisions a little bit easier. And I think one thing that I've been thinking about kind of coming up to this is how do we make that idea of having to do that a little bit less daunting? And one thing I'd say to that is don't leave it all the way to the end. Like if you're doing this kind of big presentation, I used to have someone on the team that said it's not a murder mystery. Like don't leave everything until the end. And if you can have regular check-ins, if you can co-create, if you can get people on the journey, not only is there no kind of big surprise and no big presentation that you kind of have to do all the way at the end, by the time you get to the end, everyone will kind of know what to expect. Those decisions will be done. And if you're co-creating with them and bringing them on the journey, then they should hopefully feel more bought in. They should feel like they're able to support you because their decisions are in that as well. So that would be kind of one tip from me. And then just like the last thing I'll say before I kind of hand over to hear your guys' opinion as well is just on that same note around like, make sure you have people in the room that can kind of back you up. They're on side, they already understand your vision. If you can bring one or two people in the team that can jump in and support you if you need to, that you've already spoken about, that you've got these little kind of little tweaks ahead of time, you've thought about questions with them that you might get, they can then just jump in and back you up and needed. So you've got a kind of team around you as well to support, to make it feel a little less daunting. So maybe see if there anything else that you can add to that as well.
Awesome tips. I think as you were talking, I was thinking, I think there's a also hidden attachment to articulating design decisions, which I think people read articulating design decisions in a way that they get accepted and they do not face friction, which I don't think it's the way it works. You can articulate your design decisions and then the decision from the business can be, we're going to go a different way. And that doesn't mean that you haven't done a good job of articulating your design decisions. It just means the decision is someone else's, and given all data and everything that you said, they understand why you ended up with your recommendation or your solution, and they still decide to go a different way, that is not a failure in your way to. So I just want to start from that space, because I think there's also other things attached to it, like designers being attached to their work, and when going into a presentation wanting to get always like a yes on their work and no friction. So I don't think that's how it works. Now, the one tip that I actually have two, they're quite similar. So I would say for someone who's a little more senior, so you have some experience, I would say the one thing that helped me hone the skill more was to mentor someone. Because when you have to obsessively repeat to a number of people why you're doing things a certain way, you'll build a better narrative for yourself as well, a better understanding for yourself. Now, obviously, what do you do if you've been just 1 year or 2 years, or you're just starting off in UX? How do you do that? Because you can't go and mentor someone else. That's a huge responsibility. So what are you going to do? Well, writing about what you do, and the act of writing, so not just like going in your mind about it, no, writing about what you do can help a lot. And this is actually one of the assignments that we love at Mento, is we ask students to write about what they do. And that, again, helps you in building the narrative of why you've done things a certain way, helps you be more articulate, and be on the spot as well. Because if you're in a meeting and somebody is asking you, like throws you a curveball, it might throw you off, and you might go like, oh, I don't know. So writing or mentoring can help you be always sort of prepared for that curveball and have a good answer for it. So yeah, those would be my two tips.
I'm gonna just go through some of the points that I've already made in the conversation quickly. So one, the most important point, again, is documenting your process, documenting everything that goes into your thinking around how to solve that problem. It will make life easier for you down the line. Another important point to articulate design decisions is to consider who you're articulating for. And so adjust your vocabulary and your presentation to your audience. When it comes to presentation, make sure you provide the right frame, you provide boundaries, context, you tell them what's going to happen. That's also very important. Another important point to build trust and to accommodate a healthy conversation is to understand how to respond properly to feedback. Radu also hinted at this earlier. It's really important to not become defensive. This is a piece of advice that comes from a very personal spot. So in the early days of my career, whenever somebody asked a question, however neutral that question might have been, I felt like, oh my God, that person knows more than I do. They know better. I made a mistake here and now I'm exposed. And so I immediately became defensive. And so this is something that is definitely detrimental to the quality and the direction of that particular conversation. So invite feedback, even tell people when it's the right time to give feedback through the presentation. And also I like a piece of advice that Tom Griever gives in his book Articulating Design Decisions. He says lead with a yes. So invite feedback in, even through the vocabulary, the language that you choose. Yes, that's a good point, but here's why I made that particular decision. This is also very important. And like with anything, when you're articulating design decisions, you're doing it so you can convince people, so you can get buy-in, so you can sometimes even foster enthusiasm around the solution that you're building. So for that to happen, you need to hone your storytelling ability. So make sure that you're telling a compelling story, that it's easy to follow through, that it's explicit, that it's digestible. And so just think about it as any story that you're telling, even to your friends. It has to be exciting in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at the clock, I think we've got. Oh, sorry, go on. I think we have probably a few minutes before we're going to drop off. So I can see that there are a few questions in the chat that have come through. So I will read a couple of them out and see how much we can kind of get through before we run out of time. So there's a question here from Maria who says, do you think that understanding the business part of design would help? So saying things like, we have used this because users like it, find it more useful, but actually it will help with kind of business goal X, Y, and Z.
This is actually a tip that I got from paying for a workshop on how to communicate with stakeholders as a design manager. So yes, I think that ideally when you're talking to business stakeholders like the CFO or the, I don't know, CEO, and they're people who, as I was talking earlier about vocabulary, they usually speak in numbers. So they look at the return on investment of design and stuff like that. Jared Spool even says that you can invent numbers when you don't have them. I'm not particularly comfortable with inventing numbers, but yeah, I feel that you should adapt your presentation to use as much as you understand the business arguments that might appeal to your audience, that might make your solutions clearer to them from a business standpoint. So I'm all for adjusting your vocabulary. Yes.
And I can definitely second that. I would not say that it helps. I would say it's critical to also understand the business. I think designers might have gotten something wrong along the way. It's not the user-centered design is not user-only design. There's also a business involved that needs to, have a revenue so they can pay you as a designer to create products, right? So as designers, as product designers, we have this task of balancing both user needs and business needs. And I think one example that I can give you here is in a meeting a year or two ago, I tried something really cool because we had a lot of ideas. A lot of people wanted to change things randomly. And I asked a question and that kind of silenced the room. And the question was, what kind of business metric are we trying to influence with this change, right? Because I felt like it was a huge investment that wouldn't lead to anywhere. So I was asking this as a design manager, but it got people thinking, oh, wait, right? Like we could spend a year building this, but is it going to do something for the business or is it just going to be for our own happiness?
Yeah, absolutely love that. I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in before we head off. So we've got a question here in articulating the why. There are times when I feel like I'm stating the obvious. I feel that I sound condescending instead of trying to be clear that we're on the same page. Do you have any tips of what to include or exclude when articulating the why?
This is a very good question from my standpoint because I keep making mistakes in that space. So I always assume that people know or have a similar knowledge as I have in terms in regards to the problem space that we're in or the problem that we're trying to solve. So from my fear, I share the same fear. From my fear of being condescending, I don't go through the details again. I don't state things that I feel should be obvious, but people don't spend as much time in that problem space as you do. So they definitely don't have, many times they don't have such a deep understanding like you do. So I don't think, or at least from my experience, I don't think that it's about sounding condescending. It's about making sure that you have you're talking on a common ground. So you understand the main things that aid that conversation into being productive. So I would say state the obvious, even if you might look ridiculous. The point of a design conversation is to make sure that everybody gets the solution and you're on the same page. So I would much rather prefer looking ridiculous than being misunderstood if that's a choice.
And the only thing I would add to that is it might just seem the obvious for you, or even if it's obvious, maybe that person is thinking of other things, right? Maybe they have other things on their mind. If they're on the business side, maybe the numbers are down, maybe they need to, they have something critical to achieve this quarter, this month, this year. So as Ioana said, practice a little empathy. Think of the person that's in front of you and the things that they care, because it might not be obvious for them as it's obvious for you.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we have hit our time. So thank you so much to Ioana, to Radu, to all of you for joining. The party's not over though. We will be heading over to the Fearless Slack channel. So if you haven't been able to, I'm sorry, we haven't answered everyone's questions here. I think the two guests have been doing a wonderful job of trying to get your answers, your questions answered in the chat. But if we haven't got to you, if there's something else that you do want to know, head over into the Slack channel now. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining. Hope that you've enjoyed listening to this today. Hope that you've taken something away from it. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day as well.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.